The air is still, thick with the silence that follows a thrown grenade. It hangs between us, heavy and suffocating, a physical thing pressing on my chest. Outside, the crickets have stopped their chirping symphony, as if even nature holds its breath, listening. Inside, the only sound is the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a tiny hammer blow against my skull. He sits across from me, framed by the soft glow of the lamp, a silhouette of casual cruelty. His words echo in the space between us, vibrating in the quiet like a plucked string that refuses to fade. "You're just boring, Sarah." The word itself feels small, insignificant, almost laughable. But wrapped in his tone, delivered with that sigh of weary disappointment, it's a scalpel. It slices through years, through shared memories, through every quiet compromise and unspoken sacrifice. It finds the softest part of me, the place where my deepest fears reside, and plunges in. My hands are shaking, though I try to keep them clasped in my lap, hidden from his view. My breath catches in my throat, a jagged shard of ice. I feel the blood drain from my face, leaving my skin cold and tight. The room, moments ago familiar and safe, warps and twists into a sterile, hostile place. The armchair I'm sitting in feels suddenly too hard, the fabric rough against my skin. He doesn't look away. There's no malice in his eyes, not overtly, just resignation, like stating a simple, undeniable fact. The sky is blue.
Water is wet.
Sarah is boring. And in that moment, under the weight of his gaze and the crushing finality of the word, I feel it too. A profound, chilling emptiness. Like I am a faded photograph, a room full of dust, a story that ended before it ever truly began. The label adheres to me, instantly, perfectly, like a second skin made of ash. He shifts in his seat, a restless movement that speaks volumes. He's already moving on, this conversation finished for him. He's stated his truth, and now he's ready for the next item on his mental agenda. He doesn't see the seismic shift that has just occurred within me, the ground cracking beneath my feet. He doesn't see the person he has just erased. He just sees boring. My throat is dry, my tongue thick. I want to speak, to defend myself, to scream, to cry. But the words won't come. They are trapped behind that icy shard in my throat. All I can do is sit there, suspended in the terrible quiet, the sound of the clock ticking, 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 measuring out the end of something I didn't even realize was dying. He clears his throat. It's a small sound, utterly devoid of emotion, just a physical necessity. He glances at his watch. The gesture is so mundane, so utterly normal, that it feels obscene in the face of the devastation he has just wrought. The clock ticks. The silence deepens. The world outside remains oblivious to the shattering happening within these walls. If this story, if this feeling hits a nerve for you, if you've ever felt defined or diminished by someone else's words, please take a moment. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are in the world right now and what time it is as you listen to this. And if you haven't already found your way to subscribe, please consider doing so now. It truly helps me bring more of these stories to life. We built a life together, brick by careful brick. Or perhaps he built it and I existed within the walls. It was quiet, stable, predictable. Our house sat on a street lined with mature oaks, their branches reaching across the asphalt like gnarled fingers. The paint on the house was a muted sage green, the trim a soft cream. Inside, the furniture was comfortable, practical. Nothing loud, nothing flashy. We had a routine. Weekdays were work, silent dinners in front of the television, early nights. Weekends were errands, maybe a quiet dinner out at the same familiar restaurant, sometimes visiting his parents. It was fine. My name is Sarah. For years, that felt like enough. Sarah, wife of David. Sarah, who kept the house tidy. Sarah, who remembered his mother's birthday. Sarah, who listened. I wasn't always quiet.
Not deep down.
There was a time, long ago, when I dreamed in vivid color. I devoured travel magazines, tracing my finger over maps of faraway lands. I read novels set in bustling cities and remote wildernesses. I scribbled stories in notebooks with faded covers, filling the pages with characters who lived lives far bigger, louder, more adventurous than my own. But life has a way of sanding down the edges of dreams. The practicalities piled up. The need for stability felt more important than the whisper of adventure. David valued order, quiet, a steady path. My colorful dreams felt disruptive. They didn't fit into the neat boxes of our shared life. So I packed them away, carefully, like old photo albums. I told myself I preferred the calm. I convinced myself that contentment was a more mature, sensible goal than excitement. I worked as an administrative assistant at a small, local firm. It was the definition of steady. The days blurred into one another, filled with scheduling meetings, filing papers, answering phones. It paid the bills. It was safe. I told myself, enough. David worked in finance. He was ambitious, driven. He talked about climbing the ladder, about investments, about the future, a future that seemed to involve bigger houses, fancier cars, but always, crucially, stability. He was good at what he did. He was respected. He was everything I wasn't or everything I had learned not to be. Our conversations grew shorter over the years. About work, about bills, about what to have for dinner. The shared laughter became less frequent. The comfortable silence morphed into something heavier, filled with unspoken things, with growing distances. I felt like a satellite, orbiting his busy, important life, performing my necessary functions, but never truly connecting. I tried. I suggested things. A weekend trip to the coast, just a few hours away. He was too busy. A cooking class together. He wasn't interested. Picking up one of my old hobbies, maybe painting again. He'd nod vaguely, his eyes already back on his phone or his laptop. The subtle rejections weren't malicious, not in a shouting, door-slamming way. They were quieter, more insidious. Like a slow leak, draining the life out of me, drop by imperceptible drop. I started to believe the narrative that was forming, not just in our home, but within myself. That I was, perhaps, inherently less interesting, less driven, less something. The vibrant colors of my old dreams faded to pastels, then to shades of gray. I became good at blending in, at taking up minimal space, at being easy. And then came that night. The quiet confession. The simple statement of fact. You're just boring, Sarah. It wasn't the first time he'd hinted at it. Little jokes about my predictable routines, comments about my lack of ambition compared to his colleagues' wives, the way his eyes glazed over when I tried to talk about something I was interested in, no matter how small. But hearing the words spoken aloud, directed at me with that air of definitive truth, was different. It was a verdict. It landed like a physical blow. My ears rang. The soft light of the lamp felt too harsh. I wanted to disappear, to shrink until I was invisible, until I occupied zero space and could no longer be perceived as boring. The silence that followed stretched into an eternity. He eventually stood up, mumbled something about needing to check emails, and left the room. He didn't look back. He left me sitting there, shattered by a single word. For days, the word followed me. It was a shadow on the wall, a whisper on the wind, a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. Boring, boring, boring. I looked in the mirror. Was it true? Was I boring? My reflections seemed to confirm it. A woman with tired eyes, a polite smile, wearing clothes that were comfortable and forgettable. I saw no spark, no fire, no adventure. Had I become the person he saw? Had I erased myself so completely that only this bland shell remained? I tried, pathetically, to change. I bought a new dress, something brighter than I usually wore. He didn't notice. I tried to initiate conversation about something current, something outside our usual routine. He responded with monosyllables. I even tried cooking a complicated new recipe, something that required effort and flair. He ate it without comment, then went back to his laptop. Each failed attempt chipped away at me further. His word had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more I tried to be not boring, the more his indifference confirmed that I was. The more I felt myself sinking into the quicksand of my own perceived inadequacy. The house felt suffocating. The routine, which I had once found comforting, now felt like a cage. Every corner held a memory of a suppressed dream, a conversation that went nowhere, a silent dinner. The air itself felt stale, thick with unspoken words and stagnant emotions. I started spending more time alone. I would sit in the small sunroom at the back of the house, pretending to read, but really just staring out at the manicured lawn, feeling utterly lost. My friends seemed to be living lives I couldn't relate to anymore, pursuing careers, raising children, traveling. My life felt paused, like a movie reel stuck on a single, unremarkable frame. The feeling of being boring wasn't just about lacking excitement. It felt like a fundamental failing. Like I lacked depth, personality, value. It felt like he had looked into my soul and found nothing there worth keeping his attention. And the worst part was, a part of me started to agree with him. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all I was. The weight of it became unbearable. I started having trouble sleeping. My appetite disappeared. I felt a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety beneath my skin. The word boring wasn't just an insult. It was a diagnosis, and it felt terminal. One evening, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, I stumbled upon an old travel blog I used to follow years ago. Before David. Before the routine. Before the quietness settled in. The photos were vibrant, the writing full of passion and wonder. The blogger was in Morocco, describing the smells of the spice markets, the intricate patterns of the tiles, the feeling of the desert sun on her skin. A tiny spark, almost extinguished, flickered within me. A memory of that girl who traced maps with her finger, who filled notebooks with stories. A ghost of a dream I had buried deep. I closed the app quickly. It felt dangerous. It felt like stepping onto unstable ground. What was the point? I was boring. I belonged here, in the quiet house, with the predictable life. That was my reality. But the image of the Moroccan marketplace lingered. It was a tiny crack in the concrete wall I had built around myself. A whisper of a possibility. The feeling of being trapped intensified over the next few weeks. David seemed more distant than ever. He was working late often, coming home exhausted, barely speaking. When he did speak, it was about work, about money, about people I didn't know. The word, boring, hung in the air, unspoken but ever-present, a barrier between us. I started looking at travel photos again, furtively, late at night when he was asleep.
Blogs, Widget videos.
It felt like I was peering into another dimension, a place bursting with color and sound and life, so different from the muted tones of my own existence. The desire gnawed at me, a desperate, quiet ache for something more, something else. I couldn't articulate it, not even to myself. It felt foolish, selfish. What right did I have to crave adventure when my life was perfectly stable, perfectly sensible? Then came the fight. It wasn't a loud fight. We rarely had those. It was cold, clinical. He was talking about future plans, about consolidating finances, about making sensible choices. He used phrases like optimizing our assets, streamlining, long-term security. It all sounded practical, reasonable. But as he spoke, I felt like he was talking about me. Optimizing me, streamlining me out of the picture. I interrupted him, which was rare. David, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Do you ever feel trapped? Like we're just going through the motions? He paused, looking at me with a look that was more surprise than anger. Trapped?
No.
We're building a solid future, Sarah. That's not being trapped. That's being responsible. He paused again, and then the look shifted, subtly. A return of that weary disappointment. Maybe you're just restless because, well, you know, your life is quite simple. Not a lot of variables. There it was. The word wasn't spoken this time, but it hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Simple. Predictable. Boring. Something snapped inside me. It wasn't a violent break, more like a fine crack spreading rapidly across glass. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I stood. Simple? My voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the quiet. Is that what you think? He looked momentarily taken aback by the flicker of something unfamiliar in my tone. But it passed quickly.
Yes, Sarah. It is. And that's fine. Someone needs to be.
Not everyone can handle complexity. He said the word complexity like it was something admirable, something only he possessed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that my mind was a universe of unspoken thoughts and feelings, that my quiet exterior hid a storm of suppressed longing, that the dreams I had buried were more vivid and complex than anything he could imagine. But the words still wouldn't come. The ice shard was back. I turned and walked out of the room. Not storming out, just walking away. I went to the sunroom and sat in the dark, the crickets now chirping their monotonous evening song. I stared out at the lawn, the same house, the same life. And the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He would never see me. Not the real me, the person I used to be, the person I still was somewhere deep down. He had already decided who I was. And that person was boring. Hours later, I was still there. The house was silent. He was probably asleep. I picked up my phone again. I opened the travel blog. I looked at the photos, the vibrant colors, the bustling streets, the vast, empty landscapes. My finger hovered over a search bar. I typed in weekend trips, then flights, then, hesitantly, solo female travel. A wave of fear washed over me. I had barely traveled alone in my life. What would I do? Where would I go? It felt terrifying. It felt impossible. But beneath the fear, a different feeling stirred. A defiant little ember of warmth. If I was boring here in this life, doing the things expected of me, what would happen if I stepped outside? What would happen if I did something utterly unexpected? Something that was just for me? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I could step back, retreat to the safety of my predictable cage. Or I could lean forward. I spent the rest of the night researching. Not exotic, faraway lands.
Not yet.
Something small, manageable. A city I'd always wanted to visit, but never had the chance. Just a few hours' flight away. A place known for its art, its history, its vibrant street life. A place that felt like the antithesis of boring. By sunrise, my mind was made up. My hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear or sadness. It was from a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. I booked the flight. I booked a small, quirky hotel.
I didn't tell David.
I didn't tell anyone. This wasn't about explaining. This wasn't about seeking permission. This was just, for me, a small, quiet rebellion. The days leading up to the trip were a blur of clandestine planning. I packed a small suitcase, filling it with clothes that felt slightly more adventurous than my usual muted wardrobe. I researched cafes, museums, walking routes. I felt a sense of purpose, a focus that had been missing for years. David barely noticed. He was consumed by his own world, his work, his plans. He was oblivious to the quiet transformation happening right under his roof. His indifference, once a source of pain, now felt like a shield. His inability to see me was, for the first time, an advantage. When the day came, I told him I was visiting a friend upstate for the weekend. It wasn't a complete lie. I did have a friend upstate, though I wasn't visiting her. He nodded absently, already scrolling through emails. He didn't ask which friend. He didn't ask for details. He just waved goodbye from the kitchen table, his eyes on his screen. As I drove away from the house, the familiar sage green receding in my rearview mirror, I felt a surge of panic. What was I doing? This was crazy. I was a boring, predictable woman, driving alone to an airport, about to fly to an unfamiliar city. But beneath the panic, the nervous energy remained. And alongside it, a fragile sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I was doing something solely because I wanted to do it. Stepping into the airport was like entering another world. The noise, the rush, the sheer number of people coming and going, each with their own destination, their own story. I felt a nervous thrill. I checked in, went through security, my heart hammering against my ribs. On the plane, looking down at the world shrinking below, I felt a profound sense of detachment. The house, the routine, the word boring. They all seemed tiny and distant, like miniatures on a map. Arriving in the new city was overwhelming and exhilarating. The air smelled different. The buildings were older, grander, filled with history. The streets bustled with a rhythm that was completely foreign to me. I felt like a raw nerve ending, exposed and hypersensitive to everything around me. I checked into the small hotel. It was charming and slightly worn, nothing like the sterile chain hotels David preferred. My room overlooked a narrow street, the sounds of the city drifting up through the open window. Hesitantly, I took out my phone. I had vaguely thought about taking some pictures, maybe just for myself. A record of this small act of defiance. I started walking, camera phone in hand, feeling awkward and out of place. I explored. I got lost in winding alleyways. I stumbled upon hidden courtyards. I sat in cafes and watched the world go by, sipping coffee that tasted richer than anything I had ever had at home. I visited museums, standing for long minutes in front of paintings that stirred something deep within me. I ate dinner alone at a small bistro, feeling strangely comfortable in my solitude. As I experienced these things, I started taking pictures. Not just quick snaps, but trying to capture the feeling of the place. The way the light hit the ancient stone, the expressions on people's faces, the vibrant colors of a street market stall. I found myself noticing details I would have missed before. I started to see again. I decided on a whim to post a few pictures online. Not on my main social media, where David or people we knew might see. I created a new, anonymous account. Just a few photos, no captions initially. Just throwing them out into the digital ether. It felt strange, exposing these little glimpses of my escape. Like leaving breadcrumbs in a vast forest. I didn't expect anyone to see them. It was just another quiet act, a way of acknowledging to myself that this was happening. The weekend flew by. I was exhausted but buzzing with a new kind of energy. My mind felt clearer, sharper. The boring label felt less absolute. I hadn't magically transformed into an adrenaline junkie, but I had done something brave, something outside my comfort zone. Something that made me feel a flicker of the person I used to be. The drive home was quieter than the drive away. I felt a sense of sadness that it was over, but also a quiet pride. I had done it. I had taken a step. Returning to the house was jarring. The silence felt heavier than before. David was there, back from wherever he had been. He greeted me with a brief nod, asked if my friend was well, and went back to his work. The contrast between the vibrant city and the muted house was stark. It felt like the color drained out of me the moment I walked back through the door. The old routine resumed. The quiet dinners, the separate evenings, the polite distance. The sense of being boring started to creep back in. The pictures on my phone felt like artifacts from another life. But I kept looking at them. And I kept adding to the anonymous online account. I started writing short captions, describing what I felt in the moments the pictures were taken. The warmth of the sun, the taste of the coffee, the feeling of getting lost, the unexpected joy of discovery. I didn't tell anyone about the account. It was my secret garden, a tiny corner of the internet where I could be the person I was slowly rediscovering. A place where the word boring had no power. Slowly, imperceptibly, things started to shift. A few people liked my photos. A few left comments, asking where a picture was taken, or saying they liked the mood. It was just a handful of strangers in the vast digital world, but each like, each comment, was a tiny drop of water on a parched plant. It felt like being seen just a little by people who had no preconceived notions of who I was. I started planning another small trip. This time, a bit further. A different country, just a few days. It felt less terrifying this time, more exciting. I told David I was going to a work conference. He barely registered it. The second trip was even better. I felt more confident, more comfortable being alone in new places. I took more pictures, wrote longer captions, trying to convey not just the sights, but the emotions. The feeling of awe standing before something ancient, the simple pleasure of a perfect meal, the quiet contemplation of watching a sunset in an unfamiliar land. The small online account started to grow. More likes, more comments, more followers. It was still tiny in the grand scheme of things, but it was growing. People resonated with the quiet authenticity of my posts. They liked the way I saw the world. The contrast between my online life and my home life became increasingly stark. Online, I was finding my voice, connecting with people, exploring the world. At home, I was the quiet wife, navigating a marriage that felt increasingly hollow. David remained oblivious. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. He was focused on his career, on something he was planning, something he occasionally hinted at with vague references to major changes coming soon and positioning ourselves. I assumed it was a big promotion, a new business venture. Something that reinforced his image of himself as a man of action, a man who wasn't boring. The more time I spent planning trips, editing photos, and writing captions, the less energy I had for the pretense of our marriage. The less I cared about his indifference. The tiny spark had grown into a small flame. I decided to take a bigger leap. A proper trip, maybe 2 weeks. Somewhere I had always dreamed of going.
Peru.
The Inca Trail. It felt monumental. Booking it felt like signing a new contract with myself. A commitment to this path, whatever it was. I told David I was taking a sabbatical, joining a guided hiking group. He frowned slightly. 2 weeks? That seems excessive, Sarah. For a hobby, the word hobby felt dismissive, a way to minimize what was becoming my lifeline. It's important to me, I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. Stating my own need felt like a revolutionary act. He shrugged. All right. Just make sure everything is sorted here before you go. And try not to be too out of touch. Things might be moving quickly while you're gone. He gave me a look I couldn't quite decipher. A hint of something calculating? Or just the usual self-absorption? I ignored the unease his words stirred. I focused on the trip, on the challenge, on the sheer, audacious joy of hiking in the Andes. Peru was transformative. The scale of the landscape, the ancient history, the physical challenge of the trek. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Every step on the trail, every breathtaking view, every interaction with fellow hikers felt like a victory. I documented it all, pouring my experiences, my fears, my triumphs into my online posts. And that's when it happened. It didn't happen overnight, not truly. It was a gradual buildup, a slow simmer that suddenly reached a rolling boil. My posts from Peru seemed to resonate deeply with people. The combination of stunning scenery, my raw vulnerability about the physical and emotional challenges, and the sense of quiet determination struck a chord. My follower count started climbing rapidly. Not just a few here and there, but hundreds, then thousands. Engagement exploded. Comments poured in, messages of encouragement, people sharing their own dreams of hiking the trail, asking for advice. My photos were shared. Other, bigger accounts started noticing and featuring my work. I was still on the trail, often in areas with limited connectivity, when the initial surge happened. When I finally got a signal, my phone nearly crashed. Notifications flooded in, a dizzying torrent of likes, follows, mentions. I sat on a rocky outcrop, staring at the screen. The vast, majestic Andes spread before me, and the tiny, glowing rectangle in my hand holding this impossible reality. It felt surreal. One moment, I was a quiet woman taking tentative steps into the world. The next, I was visible. Undeniably, unexpectedly visible. By the time I flew home, something fundamental had shifted. My anonymous account wasn't anonymous anymore. I had a growing platform. People were interested in what I had to say, in where I went, in how I experienced the world. The quiet defiance had somehow, miraculously, become something bigger. I returned to the house, buzzing with this new reality, but also apprehensive. How would David react? I had told him I was taking a hobby trip. Now, the hobby had taken on a life of its own.
He was waiting for me.
Not at the door with a welcome home hug, but in the living room, sitting in his usual chair, laptop open. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "How was your sabbatical?" "It was incredible," I said, my voice hoarse with a mixture of exhaustion and suppressed excitement. "Really, all life-changing." He nodded slowly. "Life-changing, right?" He closed his laptop. "Because of the internet." My stomach clenched. He knew. He knew about the sudden influx of attention.
He must have seen it, or heard about it somehow.
The anonymity was gone. "Yes," I said, deciding to meet it head-on. "Things took off online while I was gone. My travel pictures and writing. It's gotten a lot of attention." He steepled his fingers, watching me with those sharp, analytical eyes. The eyes of the man who handled finances, who optimized assets, who calculated risk. "A lot of attention," he repeated. "Meaning what precisely?" "Meaning hundreds of thousands of followers in the last 2 weeks. Messages from brands. People want to partner with me." I said the words, and they felt alien. "Partner with me?"
Me?
"Boring, Sarah." A muscle twitched in his jaw. This wasn't the reaction I expected.
No pride, no curiosity.
Just tension. "Hundreds of thousands," he said slowly. "Overnight." "It feels like it," I admitted. He leaned back in his chair, a strange smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was predatory. Well, isn't that interesting? The conversation that followed was not about my trip, or my feelings, or the incredible experience I had just had. It was about numbers, analytics, potential revenue streams. He talked about my sudden online presence like it was an unexpected stock market surge he needed to analyze and exploit. He saw it as a financial event, not a personal transformation. "This changes things, Sarah," he said, standing up and walking towards me. He stopped just a few feet away, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "This changes everything." I thought he meant our relationship, our future together. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would finally see me, see that I wasn't boring, that I was capable of something remarkable. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. "You see," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, losing the analytical edge and gaining something colder, harder. "My plans were progressing nicely. Very nicely. And your predictable simplicity was actually quite convenient." My blood ran cold. "Convenient? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the divorce," he said, the word hitting me with the force of a physical blow.
Divorce.
He had been planning this? While calling me boring. While I was trying, in my pathetic way, to connect with him, to prove I was more than he saw. My mind reeled. The pieces started to click into place, horrifyingly. His late nights. His distance. The way he talked about optimizing assets. About positioning ourselves. He wasn't talking about our shared future. He was talking about separating his life, his finances from mine. And he wanted it to be clean. Quiet. Predictable. With a wife who was too simple to cause problems. Too boring to fight back. Divorce? I whispered, the world tilting on its axis. "You were planning to divorce me?" "Yes," he said, without a flicker of regret.
"For a while now."
"There's someone else, Sarah." Of course. There was always someone else in these stories. Someone who wasn't boring, presumably. Someone exciting? Ambitious? Someone who fit into his grand plans. And the boring comment. My voice was shaking, but I needed to understand the depth of the cruelty. Was that part of it? To soften the blow? To make me feel like I deserved it? He gave a short, humorless laugh.
"No, Sarah."
"Not exactly. It was honest. You were boring. And frankly, it made this much easier. I needed someone who wouldn't complicate things. Someone who wouldn't fight for anything because they didn't feel they had anything worth fighting for." He paused, looking me up and down, a look of cold assessment. "Someone who wouldn't have the resources or the nerve to challenge me.
The ice shard in my throat shattered. Not from pain, but from a sudden, burning rage. He hadn't just thought I was boring. He had relied on it. He had built his plan on my perceived inadequacy, my quietness, my lack of fight. He had seen my suppressed nature not as a part of me that needed nurturing, but as a weakness to be exploited. And then came the twist. The part he couldn't have predicted in his carefully calculated plan. "But now," he said, his smile returning, wider this time, but still devoid of warmth. "Now you're not so boring, are you? Suddenly, you're valuable. Publicly valuable." He stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm, but stopping just short. "This changes the divorce, Sarah. Significantly. Your sudden platform, your earning potential, that affects the asset division." My mind raced. His plan wasn't just to leave me. It was to leave me quietly, perhaps saddle me with less, keep more for himself, and the someone else, my boringness, was a key component of his strategy. A meek wife who wouldn't hire lawyers, wouldn't demand much, wouldn't have the means to trace his hidden assets or challenge his terms. But now, I had a platform. I had potential income. And I had something else. A fire in my belly that had been ignited by his cruelty and fanned by my own quiet journey of self-discovery. The boring woman he planned to discard had become someone he suddenly needed to control. "So," he continued, his voice lower, conspiratorial, "here's what we do. We present a united front. Publicly, we are the happy couple. We use your platform to our advantage. My business needs exposure, needs a good image. Your new fame can provide that. In return, we negotiate a fair settlement, one that reflects our mutual benefit. And you cooperate. You don't make a fuss. You don't talk about the real reasons. You don't mention the someone else." He thought he still held the power. He thought he could pivot his plan, incorporating my unexpected success into his existing framework of control and manipulation. He saw my viral visibility not as my own hard-won victory, but as a new resource he could manage and leverage. He took another step towards me, confident, assuming my silence was agreement or shock. That's when it happened. The shift. The turning of the tables. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Not as my husband. Not as the man who had hurt me, but as a predator whose carefully constructed trap had just been demolished by a butterfly unexpectedly flying out of the cocoon he thought he had sealed shut. My voice was steady, calm, colder than his. "You called me boring, David." He frowned, caught off guard by the change in my tone. "We can discuss that later, Sarah. Right now, we need to focus on strategy. Your strategy. Our strategy." "No," I said, taking a step back, putting space between us. My voice gained strength. "There is no our strategy. There is only mine." He stared at me, confused. "Yours? What are you talking about?" "You plan to discard me," I said, the words clear and sharp. "You built your escape on the premise of my insignificance, my lack of resources, my lack of spirit. You wanted a quiet, clean break from the boring wife. You wanted to take what you wanted and walk away, knowing I wouldn't have the means or the courage to stop you." My voice rose, not in a shout, but with an intensity that crackled in the air. "You underestimated me, David. You saw a quiet woman and assumed she was empty. You saw my contentment as complacency. You saw my dreams gathering dust and thought they were gone forever." His face was pale now. The confidence was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. He saw it coming but couldn't stop it. "While you were planning your exit," I continued, "while you were calculating your assets and finding someone more exciting, I was finding myself. Step by quiet step, mile by mile. Through every fear I faced on that mountain, through every moment of wonder I shared with strangers online." I looked him dead in the eye, my gaze unwavering. "You called me boring. You planned to leave me for someone else. You planned to take advantage of my perceived weakness. And then, overnight, the boring wife you discarded became the person with the platform, the audience, the voice." I smiled then. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the cold, hard satisfaction of a trap sprung.
Do you know how much attention a story gets online, David? Especially a story about overcoming challenges? About finding yourself? About betrayal? His eyes widened in genuine fear. The color drained completely from his face. He understood. My platform wasn't just a financial asset he could co-opt. It was a weapon. And I held the trigger. You wanted a clean break? I said, my voice dropping back to a low, dangerous level. You won't get one. You wanted a quiet divorce? You won't get one. You wanted to walk away from the boring wife and start your new life? You will walk away from the boring wife and face the consequences of everything you've done, laid bare for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, of people to see. I took out my phone. The same phone I had used to capture the beauty of Peru, the same phone that now buzzed incessantly with notifications, connecting me to a world he knew nothing about. I haven't told anyone yet, David, I said, my thumb hovering over the social media app icon. Not about the divorce plans. Not about the someone else. Not about how you saw me. But I will. I will tell my story. Every single, boring detail. How a man told his wife she was boring while planning to leave her for someone else. How he underestimated her. How she found her voice and her strength in the quiet corners he ignored. He took a stumbling step back, his hand reaching out as if to grab the phone, to silence me. Sarah, no. You can't. Think about the consequences. To my career. To everything. You should have thought about the consequences, I said, my voice steel, when you decided to build your future on tearing me down. The fight drained out of him. His shoulders slumped. His face crumpled, not in sadness, but in the utter, complete defeat of a man who had just watched his meticulously crafted world collapse around him. The boring wife, the one he thought he could control, manipulate, and discard, had not only survived, she had thrived, and her unexpected success was now the very force that would bring about his ruin. He sank back into the chair, his eyes wide and staring, seeing not me, but the future he had just lost. The power he had wielded was gone. The control he craved was impossible. The narrative he had tried to write for my life had been rewritten, and he was the villain. He hadn't just called me boring. He had tried to make me boring, to keep me small, to ensure I would never be a challenge. But in doing so, he had unwittingly pushed me towards the very path that led to my strength, my visibility, and ultimately his downfall. He had underestimated the quiet woman, and it had cost him everything. He sat there, a picture of a man utterly blindsided, the silence in the room now filled not with his casual cruelty, but with the deafening sound of his own defeat. He had collapsed, not physically, but existentially, under the weight of the future he had just destroyed for himself. The aftermath wasn't a clean, Hollywood ending. It was messy and complicated, as real life tends to be. The divorce was difficult, of course. My lawyer, initially skeptical, became a fierce advocate as she understood the dynamics and, more importantly, saw the numbers behind my growing platform. David fought, threatened, tried to control the narrative, but every move he made just proved the story I was quietly, carefully starting to tell. I didn't use my platform for a public takedown, not in the way he feared. That wasn't my style. My story wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. About finding my voice. About realizing my own worth, independent of anyone else's opinion. I started sharing more of my journey, not just the travel but the internal landscape. The fear, the doubt, the quiet moments of despair, and the slow, hard-won process of building myself back up. I talked about feeling invisible, about the power of words, about finding strength in unexpected places. I didn't name names, but the narrative was clear, and it resonated. The community that had gathered around me online became a source of incredible support. Messages poured in from people who had felt similarly dismissed, underestimated, or trapped. My story, born from a place of deep hurt, became a beacon for others navigating their own quiet struggles. David's world did indeed collapse. The exposure, though indirect, the complicated divorce proceedings with a suddenly empowered wife, the rumors that inevitably circulated, it all damaged his carefully constructed reputation. His plans, whatever they fully entailed, crumbled. The someone else disappeared from the picture quickly. It turned out she wasn't interested in a man whose life was suddenly in turmoil, whose carefully managed image was in tatters. He lost his job, faced financial repercussions he hadn't anticipated, all because the person he deemed insignificant turned out to be the most significant force in his life. He became, ironically, the cautionary tale. And me? I traveled. I wrote. I connected. My platform grew, and with it, opportunities one could never have dreamed of. I became a travel influencer, yes, but more than that, I became a storyteller. I used my voice to talk about resilience, about the importance of seeing and valuing yourself, about turning pain into purpose. The house was sold. I found a small apartment filled with light, a place that felt like mine, and only mine. I filled it with things that sparked joy, not with sensible, muted furniture chosen to fit someone else's idea of stability. Sometimes, in quiet moments, the memory of that night returns. The heavy silence, the ticking clock, the casual cruelty of a single word. It still stings, a faint scar on my heart. The sadness for the lost years, for the marriage that was never truly seen by one of its participants, lingers. It's a complex tapestry of emotions, pain, triumph, liberation, and a persistent, underlying ache for what could have been, had he only bothered to look beyond the surface. But the dominant feeling now is gratitude. Gratitude for the spark that refused to die. Gratitude for the courage, however hesitant, to take that first step. Gratitude for the unexpected community I found. And yes, a cold, hard, undeniable gratitude for the word that shattered my life and forced me to rebuild it into something infinitely more beautiful, more vibrant, and more me. I wasn't boring. I was just quiet. And you can miss a lot when you don't listen closely. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you were underestimated, unseen, or defined by someone else's narrow view, know that you are not alone. Your story matters. And if you're still here, listening perhaps somewhere else in the world at a different time, I'd love to hear your version or just know you were here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thank you. Thank you for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life. Stories about the quiet moments that change everything, about finding your voice, and about the messy, beautiful, unpredictable journey of becoming yourself.